Okay, so we will start now.
Yeah, please.
We're live. Hello and welcome to second edition of Dialogues on Localizing Sustainable Development Goals. This series is jointly an All India Institute of Local Government and Urban Affairs magazine. My name is Abhishek and I'm moderating today's discussion on making urban economic development sustainable. We all are aware that we are in the midst of asymmetrical recovery, economic recovery. In some countries, COVID-19 infection rates have fallen significantly, while in others, the virus remains difficult to control. But whether governments are actively managing outbreaks or returning to normalcy, economic recovery is crucial to their forward-looking agenda. For without a broad-based economic expansion, it is difficult to address other challenges such as education and healthcare, which came to the fore during the pandemic time. We have seen that the urban infrastructure, especially health infrastructure, in many cities collapsed and the citizens had to suffer because of hospital beds were not available and oxygen supply and other medical aids were not available in time to many people. So cities are now focusing on renewing their priorities and trying to fix the existing problems that cities are facing so that the people, their citizens need not to face any difficulty in going on about the day-to-day life. But while cities are doing this, they have to make sure that the economic activities in cities are not halted, but also it is sustainable. Because when we are talking about localizing sustainable development goals, it cannot be fulfilled unless and until cities achieve economic resilience. Many cities in India, we have seen that the cities like Mumbai and Delhi and Bangalore, these are the big cities with higher concentration of population, with higher percentage of economic activities happening in these cities. If we look at the GDP contribution of these cities to states exchequer, for example, like the city like Bangalore contributes a lot more than other cities to the state's exchequer. So it is very important that the cities need to prioritize how they are going to recover from the economic shocks. Go through some data that International Monetary Fund recently raised its projection for economic growth in 2021 to 6%, up from 5.5% and projects 4.4% growth in 2022. The outlook is based on how well the pandemic continues to be controlled, the efficacy of fiscal policy in mitigating economic damage and global financial conditions. Although businesses are the engines of the economy, we all know that, and the cities are the engines of growth, we all know that. But how government create the environment and structure that enable enterprises to flourish, how local governments create and shape the environment for economic recovery depend on decisions they take at the local level. So I will not take much time of the audience because we have extremely speakers and experts from the domain who have been working in this area for decades. So we will be discussing the key points like local economic development and sustainability, importance of resource and energy efficiency, building conducive environment for revamping revenue and sustainable practices, innovative economic models, engagement of stakeholders, and role of ULBs. So our first, I will just go through the flow of the webinar. First, I will invite Mr. Raj Libran, former director of India Habitat Center. Welcome to the webinar, sir. And we will
Thank
invite you
you.
first, and then we'll go to Dr. Kamlakant Pandey. He's a professor at Indian Institute of Public Administration. And then we'll go to Dr. Lekha Chakrabarti. And then last but not the least, to Mr. Amarjot Singh Bedi to understand how cities and towns are dealing with this economic challenge and how they are localizing. So our first speaker of today's webinar is Mr. Raj Libran. He was a former director of he's the former director of India Habitat Center, New Delhi, served in the government of India as financial services for 30 years. So before moving to the non-governmental sector to head the IHC, he has varied experience with a significant range of responsibilities at the senior level in public sector and NGO environments, building and sustaining organizations, programs and missions with sector-specific objectives and services. This profile includes creating and sustaining economic and financial systems for large organizations, financial evaluation and negotiation of contracts, budget formulation and management, resource mobilization and fund management, processing of project approvals, their feasibility, economic viability and funding patterns, monitoring their implementation and identification and finalization of organizations' investment. Welcome to the webinar, sir. Over to you for your expert remark on this.
Thank you, Abhishek.
Making,
nice to be a part of this initiative. I'm glad to hear that this is the second in the series and you have many planned in the offing. And it's nice to be associated with some of the experts, who are regular students of the urban issues. I'm a casual observer and a user of civic services. So my experience is basically stemming from that. Well, the subject that you have chosen is very complex and really very challenging. Making urban economic development sustainable, making anything sustainable is a mountain to climb. And I think the first proposition that I'd like to mention before proceeding on the others, I'm not going to give any statistics and the rates of growth and the size of population in cities, etc., etc. Considering the nature of the panelists here, everybody would know that. But I would like to say that my first observation is that making anything sustainable is not the outcome that matters so much. It is the underpinnings of any policy, any implementation, any thing that is done. Is those small bits and pieces eventually which add up to sustainable. Sustainability does not come sort of merely because we have intention of making something sustainable, but it only comes from the kind of systems we put in place and the kind of ingredients we put in place for the outcome to be sustainable. Let's take a few things as givens, that cities will be populated, and as economic opportunities expand, populations will continue to be added. Cities will harbor the dreams of various segments and will thus have to have fertility in its ambience that will inspire and nourish these dreams. In the singular strength, that ability to be able to allow people and let people pursue their excellence, actually in this very ambience lies the prosperity of a city. If it is not there, if that doesn't happen, the city will die itself sooner or later. Cities in India are no different in their potential and offerings. Economic and job opportunities, education, healthcare, and a chance for a better life, at least for the generations to come, are some of the factors that attract people from the countryside and anywhere else. The poor undergo a million hardships to do something better for their families. As everybody knows that last year, the COVID-19, the coronavirus, etc., has actually, destroyed many lives. Lakhs fell victim to the virus. Many thousands could not get healthcare. Lakhs felt abandoned in the cities of their work, no money, no food, no shelter, and no one to turn to. And lakhs of them went home facing extreme hardships. Some of the, some on foot, some on cycles, trudging thousands of miles to be, next to their near ones. So nobody really knew the answers to these issues as to how, the people who had come here to help their future, actually all of, in one sudden strike, everything shut out. Everything closed on them. and sort of the state couldn't find answers, the people couldn't find answers. There was no mitigation, no rehab, and there was a bleak future. Well, this is a tragedy of our times, as we all know, and this will be a historic black mark, and is a result, as a consequence of our cumulative neglect of some of the basic ingredients which we want to make anything through which we want to anything to make sustainable. So be that as it may, I mean, those are things that have happened, etc. There's not much point dwelling over those. But do we have better answers now? The question is, that's the purpose of this entire discussion. Can we build on some answers that we can turn to, in times of distress such as these, and of magnitude of this pandemic really needs some very strong answers. First and foremost, I think, is that our urbanization story has to stop playing with the logic of nature as a start. We have built cities in disregard of water tables, topography, and green spaces. I think we need to stop doing that. Let's take into account the most essential factors on which any human settlement is going to evolve and flourish. Second, we have to make hygiene as a matter of utmost priority. Waste of all kinds is building the toxicity of the environment everybody knows on a daily basis. We live in cities where waste management is pathetic, if not non-existent. It is impacting lives and reducing lifespans. We need to pay heed to the fact that clean environment is a non-negotiation basis of going forward. If we are not going to do that, forget sustainability. People cannot get jobs unless they have skills. They cannot acquire skills if there is no capacity building system available. So we need skill givers. Here we need a massive effort in locating skill building capacities in the proximity of the neighborhoods. Like in the 1950s in Tamil Nadu, the policy was that there'll be a primary school within 3 kilometers. I think it should be even less. It should be in, within, let's say, not more than 500 to 750 yards, even if it's a small school. To build, we need to tap into the ability of to build these capacities. We need to tap into the ability of the voluntary sector to organize and deliver. I think we have ignored this dimension for quite some time. We've treated them as pariahs. We treated them as people, who are out to garner money and not deliver. I think systems need to be put in place for that. The third, or rather the fourth, one formula that has to apply: simplify, digitize, and deliver has to be the motto of all development. Look at our, the laws, look at our municipal laws, look at our bylaws, look at the construction laws. I mean, they're full of contradictions, and, it takes God knows who to understand what the hell do they mean. What do they want us to do? You can't live in the basements. You can't, go beyond certain stories. You can't do this. You can't do that. And yet everything happens. There is no regulation whatsoever. And next one is the fifth: my communities will improve only through better and faster connectivity. Transportation and telecom are two important drivers that these are the ones that actually build relationships. Next one, we need social infrastructure in every city so that culture, cohesion, and coexistence can thrive. Peace is a vital ingredient of sustainability and of a thriving economy. That's the common factor. Countryside and open spaces need improvement. The distinctions have to go. City limits have lost their relevance. One city stops, the other one starts. Yet administratively, the regulations, the same regulations don't apply. You have another different set of regulations. And again, they contradict. So, these are some of the issues that need to be simplified, so that they can be understood. And of course, in the end, again, once again, emphasizing that the real challenge is indeed sustainability. How to make these things durable and lasting. One fundamental fact, of course, all of us know, and we live in this situation, that nothing is permanent. But at the same time, a beautiful garden needs to be tended well. So the city has to be nursed and nourished. You know, the one solution is not going to last for 50 years. You have to keep on inventing and reinventing solutions on a daily basis. But systems last, so the systems have to be strong. We have to keep ahead of the volumes and in step with technologies and evolve a policy of compatibility as we go. There has to be mutual compatibility between the systems, between the people, between the users, and between the governance objectives. Politics of incompatibility insofar as city building is concerned has no place in a campaign for sustainable living. And until unless we do that, it's not going to work. Economy will flourish only if we have a framework of facilitation, including, and most important, including an attitude and inclination for assistance in the part of the people who are responsible for making governance work. To reiterate and emphasize in conclusion, I think there is no escape and no running away from the fact that we need to simplify, digitize, and universalize the governance system. Otherwise, we can muddle on as we are wont to do. Thank you. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, sir. I think you have made very important points of how we are going to integrate the services provided by the corporations, the systems built by the local bodies for economic prosperity of cities and citizens. So I think that other local bodies in India and the other government agencies must take a cue from the address that you have given to build a system build a framework where cities are made to flourish. Also, the development is sustainable, and the industries, those are adapting these practices for that matter, like circular economy or the creative economy, or the bylaws or the policies they are making for people should be made keeping in mind sustainability. Thank you so much, sir, for your address, and we'll get back to you. We will get some questions from the audience, I'm sure. So I will get back to you again. Now, our second speaker is Dr. Kamalakant Pandey. Is a professor of urban management and coordinator of Center for Urban Studies at IIPA. He holds a PhD in urban finance and PG diploma in housing planning from Institute for Housing and Urban Development Studies, Netherlands. He has intensively worked on urban management and finance for 4 decades. He has been a part of expert committees constituted by UN Habitat, UNESCO, UNESCAP, and on urban finance, governance, and training of trainers, poor PPF, sustainable development, and urban management. So over to you, Dr. Pandey, for your address on this issue, how our cities are going to become sustainable and prosperous at the same time. Over to you, sir. Sir, you are muted. Please unmute yourself. You have switched off your camera. Can we? Ashley, can we do that? Dr. Pandey, I think you have switched off your camera and you are still muted. Yeah. Please unmute yourself.
Am I audible, Abhishek ji?
Yeah.
Yes,
Now
you
you
are
are.
audible, sir. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. So topic of this seminar organized by All India Institute and CityNet is very appropriate. Countries are suffering from impact of COVID and economies are looking forward to quick recovery, what we call V-shaped recovery. And in this process of V-shaped recovery, urban economies will play a major role. What I am going to share is the fact that there are three main issues in urban development, that is urbanization, productivity, economy, and environment. And all the three are interconnected. When we talk about economy, the health of people, the safe environment is very important aspect, and what city government provides as services and infrastructure is enabler for productivity and also to promote safe environment. So in that connection, the focus is on uh, adequate services, and it will be more when we are looking for a V-shaped recovery. In this context, the role of extra budgetary or participatory resources through engagement of stakeholders, which is the topic of one of the topics of this seminar, is very important, because resources are only 1% of GDP are available with municipal bodies, and if we compare with countries like Poland and Brazil, we need 5 to 7%. So there is a need to have a quantum jump in the resources, which cannot come all of a sudden in a short run from budgetary support. What we need is engage stakeholders and mobilize their support. So it is in this context I am going to share a case study of Bengaluru with regard to waste management. I will cover the initiatives of BBMP, Brahat Bangalore Mahanagar Palike, dry waste collection and kitchen waste disposal, and water treatment, and finally what are the lessons. As I said, there is a global focus on urbanization, productivity and environment, which are interlinked, and in India also the same focus is given equal emphasis. Our current year's budget has Swachh Bharat Mission 2 as beginning, which includes ODF++, which means collection and disposal of waste. Jal Jeevan Mission has been initiated by the Government of India to connect all the houses with water, safe water, pipe water, and also to make arrangements for recovery, for treatment and reuse of water. 15th Finance Commission, which also submitted its report last year, put a special focus on water and sanitation. Government of India missions, all the missions, whether it is Smart City, Amrut, Hriday, PMAY, all have focus on water and sanitation in one way or other. And city to city competition is also recognized by rating by the Government of India, and capacity building is taken up by several institutions and state governments and Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. 15th Finance Commission has started Metro Challenge Fund for 44 urban agglomerations which have 67 class 1 cities and more than 1,000 less than 1 lakh towns, where a special focus is on ambient air quality, 32% funds out of this 38,000 crore, and 68% funds for solid waste management are allocated. Remaining 83,000 crore, 40% is untied and 60% is again for water and sanitation. So the entire funding of 15th Finance Commission has very special focus on water and sanitation. And that for the remaining towns, other than the 1 lakh plus, 30%, which means half for solid waste management, and another half is for rainwater harvesting and water recycling. And here some parameters like benchmarking, which is initiated by the Ministry of Urban Development, and performance assessment are also taken. The current year's budget, as I said, has Jal Jeevan Mission to cover all statutory towns, 4,378. And as per Sustainable Development Goals, sewage, septage management in Amrit towns is focus of Jal Jeevan Mission with 2,87,000 crore, and 1,41,000 crore is allocated to Swachh Bharat Mission. So the government support through budget is coming in a big way. Other missions also are there in addition to this. What we need is convergence and synergy, because these government initiatives are also separate. So they should be converged, and gap is very high. It will not be enough through these funds only. So one approach to involve stakeholders, and states are also adding, in addition to this, their own funding through state finance commissions. Jal Jeevan Mission to augment sustainable fresh water is their focus. City water local area plan, circular economy, recycle, reuse is the process in which the water and sanitation is supposed to be taken up. To have greenery, water security, mapping, drainage plan, 20% reused water should be used for domestic, and 40% industrial demand should be met through reused water. This is another target under Jal Jeevan Mission. And particularly what they say, dual pipe system should be established in bigger cities, and non-revenue water should be 20% and less. It should not go beyond 20%. And the mission tends to have a survekshan to have mapping and know the current situation, whether the equitable distribution is there to what extent. Similarly, Swachh Bharat Mission is going to focus on ODF plus and plus plus, wastewater treatment including fecal sludge management, ODF plus for 1 lakh plus towns and plus plus for others. And garbage free cities with 3 rating should be achieved. At least this is the mandate for Swachh Bharat Mission 2, which is initiated this year. So as we know, waste has its value. It's not waste, it is resource. 1,000 kilogram of electrical and electronic waste has gold, contains gold found in 5,000 to 15 kilogram of gold ore. Similarly, do you know recycling of 1,000 kilogram of aluminum saves 5,846 liter of oil, 1,300 kilogram of bauxite residues and 50,000 liters of water. So it has immense value for environment. And in this context, we are going to discuss a very specific case of Bengaluru, where stakeholder participation is making a change. Their initiatives include dry waste collection, kitchen waste disposal, and water treatment. Decentralization is the core. And in this process, 7C are playing very important role in the city. These are court, commissioner, councillor, community, civil society, corporate social responsibility, and citizen. Commissioner means the municipal system. So a convergence and synergy is developed within the city in a top-down and bottom-up integration manner, and a model for Swachh Bharat Mission 2, urban and Jal Jeevan mission and other missions is emerging from Bangalore experience. As anywhere, Bangalore also has the problem of landfill, but the global emphasis now is to minimize the waste going to landfill site. How to do that is the main objective behind Bangalore initiatives. First thing which I would like to include is Honorable Karnataka High Court in 2018 gave cognizance to this issue especially and said create a ward committee. Bangalore is the first city where ward committee is created, not the wards committee. Other major cities have wards committee, which is not a proper model to operate at grassroots level. So what High Court suggested that create ward committee with 10 members, councillors, women, one municipal functionary, one civil society person, and so on. And High Court also said prepare a micro plan at neighborhood level for 1500 population for disposal of liquid and solid waste. In this process, Bangalore Mahanagar Palike has its own system, and they developed a framework to take up the task. And that framework includes Shuchi Mitra at grassroots level, who involve community, interact with them, and the master trainer have been identified and trained so that a top-down consolidation is done. This Shuchi Mitra and master training engaged the community to segregate waste and wherever feasible take initiative to treat the water locally. Another very important step taken in Bangalore is composting Santhe. Santhe means fair, weekly fair to display equipments, etc., to treat solid and liquid waste, invite companies which are producing these products at ward level. And each ward on Sunday has this composting Santhe, which was stopped due to COVID, but now since March, they have again initiated. Then another important thing is that all 198 wards in Bangalore have dry waste collection center, which are operating along with corporate social responsibility from ITC and use of NGOs and other partners, private sector. And last is the neighborhood and household level initiatives which are being taken in the city. So dry waste collection It starts with composting santhe, dry waste collection centers, NGO participation where rag pickers and informal sector is engaged, reduction in material going to landfill, they sell it to the buyers, the material taken out, and a sort of circular economy is developed in the city in a substantially reasonably good manner. This is the dry waste collection center in one of the ward. You can see with the help of rag pickers and Shuchi Mitra, they are segregating the material which is sold to the different buyers. So this is at neighborhood level and ward level. Kitchen waste is another very important aspect of waste. Here, ward level monitoring is done to engage stakeholders. Processing is done in the multi-story buildings at the rooftop or resident welfare associations, for example, in the Yelahanka zone and other zones also. Neighborhood level processing is done in Dollar Colony especially and other colonies. I visited Dollar Colony, which I will show. Ward level processing and education centers and the manure is sold. Another important aspect is green leaf, which is a problem. So Bengaluru is using green leaf composter, which cost around 1,500 to 2,000 rupees, and green leaves are put. Over that, the coconut peat or cow dung is placed, and within 3 weeks, it becomes manure. Similarly, temple waste is also treated separately in the same way. So we can see the on the rooftop. This is the equipment in which kitchen waste is done, and it becomes manure within 3 weeks. This is Dollar Colony, where kitchen waste is put for the entire about 300 houses and treated and sold as a manure. This is another view of Dollar Colony. You see this leachate comes out, and this is very good for plants. So this leachate is used for plants, and within 3 weeks they get manure. This is green leaf composters, which are placed at different parts of the city in different colonies. This is Koramangala, and she is president of the Koramangala Resident Welfare Association, and another madam is chief health officer of the Bangalore Mahanagar Palika. And this is how it is taken up and treated. This is a society of 1,600 flats where sewage is treated for good environment and beautification of the area and use of treated water partly. This is temple waste. And this is in the Koramangala kitchen waste is processed at ward level. And here RWA plays important role. They display different methods, and this you can see with this much of quantity, the kitchen waste is processed and manure is packed and sold. So this is a very good initiative towards organic farming. Health issue, environment issue, economy issue, circular economy, all are interconnected and are happening in this case. There is another Purva Venezia Housing Society, which has 1,332 flats on Major Unni Krishnan Road, its own processing system for kitchen waste and dry waste, treatment plant they have for sewage, and using treated water for beautification. They have, again, in this process, there is a support from municipal system. Shuchi Mitra, master trainer, the chairperson of this society is a master trainer, and link workers are there, and a very good system of municipal cooperation. Mr. Andeep is additional commissioner of Bengaluru Mahanagar Palike, and he was transferred 2 years back, but there was so much of public pressure that his transfer was cancelled. Similarly, there is one person, Sarfaraz Ahmed. So there are local champions. He is again additional assistant commissioner. So there is a very good team in the city which is mobilizing these initiatives. Then systematically, Porokarmikas, the sanitation workers, contractors, local community is engaged. Civil society in this society is led by Padma Patil, who is a master trainer and also chairperson of the Resident Welfare Association. We can see how this 1,300 flats society
So we have 2
is
minutes.
having treated water for beautification
So
and
we have 2
green.
minutes. You can wrap up in 2 minutes, sir, please.
Pardon?
We have 2 minutes for this presentation. If we can wrap up in 2 minutes. 2 more minutes.
Okay, sure. This is another Kabban Park where water is treated in a decentralized manner to reuse in the park, which is a bigger park. So what lesson we learned is city level dedicated cell to mobilize link workers and community is needed. A system of municipal government, effective municipal government is important. With the instruments like composting Santhe to educate people to be should be a regular feature. Share knowledge, experience, skill, and motivate segregation and procedure at source with the help of the municipal system. Cost-effective, environment-friendly method like green leaf composting should be used to have the overall objective of 4R, reuse, recycle, and ultimately make it a resource. Bring in the city, community, private investment, but also reduce the total waste going to landfill site. So in this also the role of corporate social responsibility is equally important. So finally what we see that decentralized waste management is a viable option, but here engagement of the community, engagement of the private sector, civil society is very important, and even court can play a very important role as they have done in Bengaluru. A well-planned municipal system and community support bring synergy and convergence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I think the topic of economic sustainability cannot be achieved unless and until we make sure that our resource efficient, adequate, and proper. So with the proper waste management, definitely we can achieve resource efficiency, also take initiatives in circular economy. Thank you so much, sir, for giving a point on how cities can improve their waste management, and by doing so, they can improve their economic condition, make citizens and local industries prosper. Thank you so much, sir. Now we will move to Dr. Lekha Chakraborty. She is a professor at the National Institute of Public Finance and that is affiliated with the Levi Economics Institute of Bard College, New York, as a research associate. Dr. Chakraborty is both member of the governing council of the International Institute of Public Finance, Munich. Her areas of interest are macroeconomics of public finance, fiscal federalism, extractive sector economics, financing human development and gender budgeting. Over to you, Dr. Lekha Chakrabarty, to give insight on this important subject of making local economic development sustainable. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Abhishek. I was listening to Dr. Pandey's presentation and, the points raised by, Dr. Raj in his opening conversation. I would like to pick up the macro issues related to the topic and especially relate to the finances, the sustainability of finances and how we can localize the SDG. So my focus of presentation will be on the macro issues. I particularly enjoyed that focus on a micro unit and, getting deep into that. And, that was quite done well by Dr. Pandey. So let me talk about the macro issues. The first point I would like to flag is the paradigm itself. We are focusing on economic growth paradigm. And it is not going beyond that. And that's a crucial mistake I think we are doing. Of course, we are talking about how we can localize SDG, but the public policy framework, whether it is fiscal or monetary or trade policies, this is quite focused on economic growth. So the point raised by Dr. Raj, the concerns about the climate change, the climate responsive public policy, that is not on board, or even the sustainable development paradigm, that's not on board the moment we talk about a growth paradigm. And if you look at the economic stimulus packages or the pandemic economics in these extraordinary times, two things constrain, urban economics. One is the focus is completely centralized. We are not believing in a fiscal decentralization. Even if there is a fiscal decentralization, it's stopping at the level of provinces. It's not coming to the third tier in the context of India. So that's a crucial concern. Here, the principle of subsidiarity, that decision process to be close to the people. So that is principle of subsidiarity, but the importance given in the pandemic's economics and the importance of, the policy making just at the one size fits all paradigm, that's limiting the entire exercise and the entire initiative forward. And this is a challenge when we talk about the sustainability of urban development or the decentralized level development. This is point number one. Second, let us unpack what is happening to relationships. As Dr. Pandey rightly pointed out, 15th Finance Commission, of course, their mandate is to devolve the funds to the subnational governments, but the adequate attention was given to the third tier. This is a crucial question because we know that based on the formula-based transfers, the funds are given to the state level and the state, through the state finance commissions, they take appropriate decisions to the local governments. But is that being done? And a few initiatives which are tied in nature was spoken by Dr. Pandey, and how long that gives a flexibility of finances at the subnational level, especially the local and the urban level, that's the crucial question. Because when there is no flexibility of finances, when there is no sustainability of finances, the development suffers. So what are the other sources of revenue? Because hard budget constraint is a crucial point at the urban level. Whether the urban government is allowed to go and float the municipal bonds or any funds in the context of India, because it is quite constrained. So the source of financing, when it gets constrained, the development outcome will also get constrained. So here, what we have to deal with is the subnational public finances, and it has to be quite crucial at the local level. And for example, if you look at the South Africa, they have quite a bit of, tax handles at the third tier. But of course, if you ask me, it is an hourglass model in the sense that the tax handles at the provincial level, like our state level, that's very narrow. So whether this hourglass model is a proper way to go about, so that we have to see the South Africa example, because, if the moment you look at the tax handles at the province level or the state level, maybe they are getting some taxes from the casinos and the horse race, but the entire dynamic taxes and the resources are at the center government, and a lot of user charges and quite a bit of strong revenue handles are at the local level. So whether the tax or the hourglass model of taxation or an hourglass model of, the revenue mobilization, that could be a wonderful example for making the urban development sustainable or not. That's a crucial question, and we can look into the South African example in which, the third tier is quite active. Now coming to the monetary policy. And only the European Central Bank has given adequate emphasis to go beyond economic growth and give emphasis to the climate change. But it's a big debate. The moment we talk about the climate change, can it be the function of a monetary policy? Because the monetary policy's important function is to handle your price stability. So the moment, you ask, the monetary policy function has to be enlarged and incorporate the climate change commitment concerns, whether that could be a sustainable model or not. Because if you look at RBI, recently, they have initiated a process of greening the economy. And we have heard about the debates related to just transition economies. So all these things are quite crucial at the local level, but the debates are getting, somehow narrowed down to the centralized policy making levels. And another crucial example is a climate responsive budgeting. In our country, we don't have a climate responsive budgeting, and maybe this could be a public financial management tool, not just confined at the national level, but also at the subnational, including the urban and the rural levels, whether we can go ahead with a very, it's a kind of a responsive budgeting. It's not like we are focusing just on, economic growth. So based on this backdrop, I would like to highlight the first point, how we can promote a solid and sustainable growth. Confined to, the growth recovery of the sectors. It's a green growth. How we can do that. The second point, how we can address the social challenges. And Dr. Raj pointed out about the social infrastructure. And the moment we look into the pandemic economics or the economic stimulus, the focus on the food security, social infrastructure, and as an employer of last resort policies, these components are very limited. And of course, the other social practices. So when these components are particularly limited, the context, because I have done a study in the context of Asia Pacific, how these components related to the social challenges are addressed in the economic stimulus packages. And this is not adequately covered in any country for that matter. So this is point number 2. The first is sustainable growth, incorporating the green aspects. The second is addressing the social challenges and the social infrastructure. The moment we talk about the social infrastructure, of course, health do matter, education do matter. And in the context of, the pandemics and the lockdown, and when the schools are closed, and when we are doing the work from home, how our cities are, sensitive to these aspects related to the digital infrastructure. Because the digital divide, that's quite a matter of concern, because unless we tackle this digital infrastructure and the digital divide, I think we are going to get this literacy level plummeted back to the pre-70s level. So how our cities are ready to tackle the issues related to the digital divide? So this is a question which is related to the social infrastructure point, which I would like to highlight. And third point is, of course, the speakers before me, Dr. Raj and Dr. Pandey, quite rightly pointed out about the enhanced participation of the stakeholders. And of course, it has to be a globalized initiative, because we have to think global and act local. So in this, what are the roles of the stakeholders? Because the government is just one partner. And what are the ways in which that stakeholder, the heterogeneity of stakeholders, of course, I do agree to that point, to make this process sustainable. And we need to have the civil society organizations and, other important partners on board to make this process sustainable. And fourth, I would also like to emphasize on, affordable housing. When we talk about, that there is no demand stimulation in the economy, it's all supply side policies, what is happening in our country from the fiscal and monetary policy side. The moment we talk about the demand stimulation, I think affordable housing, and that is very important to be focused, because we have to provide a better conditions in which many households live. And when we talk about the social challenges, the migration crisis was quite prominent when it comes, because we don't even consider this migrant, the displaced labor as a part of cities. So when we talk about making cities, the economic development sustainable, this humanitarian crisis need to be given emphasis. Otherwise, the moment we go for a top-down approach, that humanitarian crisis will mount, and we have seen it right in front of our eyes, if you call that labor crisis or the migration crisis. So what are the ways in which the cities consider they as a part of them, and what are our preparation to keep these migrant laborers as part of cities? These are the questions we need to think about to make the economic development. So it's very brilliantly done, the topic, making economic development of an urban unit sustainable. You have not just focused on the economic growth. So development is a broader concept, that is growth with equity. So what are the components we need to focus on this equity for this humanitarian concerns that needs to be, given adequate emphasis. And these are the quick points I thought. And of course, the process of nudging is very important. And we have seen that it's not alone public action that leads to the sustainable development. It's also the public policy. So how we can nudge the public actions through the public policy, this linkage needs to be seen quite properly, how the public action and the public policy needs to be linked to take it ahead. So I thought that these are the quick points I will raise, and then, during the question and answer session, I can take up the questions and answer. Thank you, Abhishek. Over to you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for talking about the humanitarian crisis that we faced during the pandemic, and how economic sustainability is very important aspect when cities are going to address these issues, whether it is of migrant population or the people living in informal settlements. Thank you so much for your insight on this. But now our last speaker is Mr. Amarjot Singh Bedi. Now we will get, we have got the insight from on different perspective. Now we will listen what when we are dealing with the cities, when we are dealing with the town at the local level, and the citizens interaction is happening on regular basis, how the people elected representatives are tackling these challenges at the local level. So I think Amarjot Singh Bedi is the former president of Una Municipal Committee, and he's also the present councillor. He will be able to answer these questions pretty well. He's also served as member of the district planning committee and the Himachal Pradesh State Pollution Control Board. He was also elected as the vice president of the Una Municipal Committee during direct elections when they were held for the first time in Una. Over to you, Mr. Amarjot, and we would like to hear from you. What is your experience when you were dealing with this pandemic challenges, and also looking at these economic challenges faced by the citizens at the local level? Over to you, sir.
Hello to everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear different perspectives. Una is a tiny little town in the Himalayas in the state of Himachal Pradesh. We also belong, the state itself is a very small state, barely 4 members of parliaments. To be honest, I think being a small state with a population that's controlled was a major factor where I personally feel we were slightly better off than the rest of the country. I have been a member in various, it's been almost for 22 years in trying to have my own businesses, etc. But I think the family who had kind of brought about this town and the area around thought it's our responsibility to be part of, the daily, the toughest, I think, election, which is the municipal election. And, I'm going to start by saying something that till, it's very easy to just talk about sustaining and how we're going to change about. But personally, I feel till we don't admit there's a problem, till then I doubt we're going to solve any problem. Till now, we haven't come across any facts on what is the unemployment scenario now. We don't have any facts about how many primary caregivers or primary bread earners have died during this pandemic, the orphans that it's left in our country, what's going to happen to the children who miss an entire year of schooling, what is their base going to be like in the future with only what I think we have, 33% of people on mobile phones. What about the rest of the remaining children? They didn't attend classes. There are barely 8% or 9% who are privileged enough to be with laptops. So, we are in tough times. It was anyway very difficult to sustain before the pandemic. It's going to be a mammoth task to get up from here. I'm going to start by saying people have learned to live a little minimalistically. In this, we've reached in for our savings. That's what's kind of saved us till now. But sooner or later, those savings are going to run out. And with people returning home, some figures are almost close to 2 crore unemployed who've lost their jobs. And we are adding stacks and stacks to it by, every year graduation and people passing out from colleges and schools. So I represent the ULB. To me, with my experience, with having family who was part of, being currently also some of my relations are ministers, etc., and some of them are, I find ULP is the only link between the government and the people and vice versa. The MLAs, MPs come and go, but we are the ones who are going to be living amongst those people who have voted for us. So keeping that in mind, I've seen the systematic dissolving of the powers of the municipal councils and the corporations and the panchayats over, with various amendments that took place in the parliament over the last 30 years, which the results you're seeing in your towns and your cities right now, where you have tons of encroachment, no footpaths left, dirt everywhere, this new norm of development called building flyovers through your cities rather than developing new areas through ring roads. All this has started with when you don't take your ULBs seriously. You wanted ULBs to be yes men. You send and implement it, some sort of a program comes in from the center or the state, the executive officers and the DCs, etc. of the area, they decide they have to do it. And a note comes to the municipal committee, please pass it, right? The Chinese were worse off than us before the 1998. After 98 till 2000, they completely revamped this. They realized the importance of having a person on ground level where every scheme is going to be made reachable to the people. Una became the most successful project in the entire state for Housing for All when I was the president. Because we realized that this Housing for All scheme, which has been there for ages, right, for the last, I think, 30, 40 years. But because of GIS tagging, GPS mapping, everything, and systematically distributing the funds rather than giving a fund and person didn't even use it for their house, was such a success. We did a tiny town of 18,000 people. We did 600 houses in this town. And that is a huge, huge thing. But that's happened in Una because it had a very conscious team in the municipal members, as well as it was a population controlled town like Himachal Pradesh is. So I can go on and how, the elections and how, I'll give you an example. I have 17 administrative posts in my municipal council, which were decided in 1994, right? Technically, there should be 30 because each post, it inculcates everything from your garbage management to your developmental projects, to your passing, to your encroachments, to your illegal construction, your water, your electricity, your street lights. 5 years, I ran the municipal committee with 3 staff members of the administrative post, with 13 posts lying vacant for 5 years. You're not going to run cities and you're going to, dream of Salzburg and Vienna, etc. in India, not for a very long time, till you don't finally take that ULBs are the guys you have to strengthen and you have to give them more money, not grants as if they're beggars, right? So I'm going to just list the problems, which I feel will, I think, I'm not going to only talk about my town, but I think the biggest problem our country is facing and will continue to face is a population control. We are not talking about it. And this pandemic showed everybody what happens. It didn't matter whether you were rich, whether you were powerful, whether you were poor. You did not have access to hospitals. Your children didn't have access, your parents didn't have access. And what kind of a country are you going to be living in where you know for a fact that you left to fend for yourself if push comes to shove? So the first and the most problem, I know how the country deals with it, whether they have to take some serious measures, the population needs to be, toned down so that because another pandemic, we're going to be even worse rather than for the better. This eventually, your population is interfering with your infrastructure, is infiltrating with your education, is infiltrating with your cities, your lives, your housing, your employment. You're getting every single day, you're getting unemployed youth onto your roads. So this is the most, I can't even, I need to highlight it in, bold red. Second is employment. How do we get employment? In a population, a country that has so much population, the primary employment giver is the government. We have to remember that. It's all said and done that you're going to privatize everything, but end of the day, the government has to be the primary, employer. And the problem with the government is because of the populist measures of hiking prices, a teacher's getting 80,000 rupees, a principal's getting 1,20,000 rupees in most of our government schools. Nothing against them, no offense. But the government cannot afford new teachers. They cannot afford new principals anymore. They cannot afford JEs and SDOs and XCNs because you're paying them too much. So is there a solution to that? No, you can't, because once the minute you reduce to this thing, you're going to lose an election. If you reduce something, they're going to go to court. So how are you going to do it? So what do? You start privatizing everything. A sweeper in my municipal council gets 38,000 with all the perks, the medical, the pension, etc. A private sweeper, which we are employing right now, gets 6,500 rupees. The disparity between the private and the government needs to, and I have a simple suggestion. I think instead of keeping the name, say a JE or a SDO, change the name, get a new designation with a new wage for that designation. You keep somebody on contract and let him come into a permanent job. Slowly, you'll see the government can start affording employees. Hence, you'll start giving more employment. But if you're going to leave us to the private agencies, they are not here to do social service. How much ever you want to talk about your PPP projects and you want to talk about, participation, they're there to make money, right? And you're in trouble if you're going to do it with all your government institutions. This is my take on this. Third, HFA is one of the greatest schemes, right? The housing for all. During this pandemic, who were the sufferers? The tenant who couldn't pay the rent, the landlord who wasn't receiving the rent. So the landlords, some wages, the kind of earning they were going to earn, it went out of the window. They had to evict that person. So now they're left with an empty house. They may be paying an interest to the bank. So that comes down to the financial aspect of it. You give this beautiful 20,000 crore, this thing, but on paper, it sounds good, but in realistically, it hasn't reached anywhere. You can't ask somebody to sustain themselves by taking another loan, right? I personally feel, don't do away with the, the way the governments come for just before election, they do it with the farmer waiver, etc. Don't do that, but waive off all your interests. The banks can surely manage somehow if the government put it, just say 1 year, the interest was completely wiped out from it. It'll help every walk of life, right? From your shopkeeper who had bought stuff for his inventory, who was unable to sell, right, to a person who had constructed a building or a shop to give it to rent, right, from a farmer who had taken a loan, because the interest is what actually end of the kill. Look at the transport industry right now. There are people I know who've got 13 Volvo buses who've been lying parked in the thing and they have to pay interest, and now guys has to sell buses at half the price. And this interest waiver, it's going to help in a long way. Because I don't, India's got too used to getting freebies, free electricity, free this. Don't do that. But at least waive all your interest, waive all your, I don't know how you go about it. There's a financial experts can explain it. And then comes the largest, biggest problem, which the world has recognized, but India seems to think that a flyover equals to development, right? My town is a small town. My entire town is based on one road. It's shops, it's residences, it's schools, it's colleges, it's government offices, it's secretariat, it's police station, it's ground, everything is on one road. When you build a flyover through my town, because somebody else wants to, and that also just a 2-lane flyover, it's not going to be a mammoth flyover because the area is congested. You're going to destroy the entire town's livelihood, firstly. You don't have employment to give them anyway. So you've done away with that. And you've imploded the town rather than expanded the town. So I think there should be more focus on building ring roads and bypasses around towns and implementing your TCP bylaws on those, so that the 50-meter gaps and 25 meters are implemented very strictly. You'll see new cities come about. You'll see new dhabas, new petrol pumps. You'll see so much this thing opportunity for new employment coming about. Land prices will shoot up for people who didn't even think about their land being sold. So these are a few ideas. And I personally, I've got a child who's 5 and an 8, and I've seen how the schooling took place. It was crazy for us. And I personally feel 1 year should be repeated for the entire country, no matter what. If you were in the 4th, you remain in the 4th for 1 year, because you might jump to the 5th, you might jump to, but how weak is your maths going to be, and how weak is your science, etc. going to be? And in the end, again, I'm going to just repeat one thing: take your ULBs very seriously, because the ULBs are the ones who are actually going to get that good feel factor. You have encroachments in the road. We suggested it to the government of Himachal: stop having your bylaws of picking up a ready. I'm going to spend petrol. I'm going to send police. I'm going to just give him a challan of 5,000 rupees, which he can't afford anyway. He will stop encroachment next day itself. These are little suggestions I'd like to this thing. And I think I've covered up whatever I wanted to say. And I was quite frustrated with the way things are. I'm a very optimistic person, but in this case, the farmers need to be supported. The horticulture and your smaller towns, each person who's returned home from big cities do have a little piece of land, but it's not enough to sustain them. So whether you have to start, changing their system of whether it's poly houses coming up in a big way, whether it's feeding the local this thing enough to earn, because this is just the tip of the iceberg. Once we come to know what the actual facts and figures are like, we are in for a very, very long haul of tough times. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. I think you have covered every aspect of local aspect. You have interacted with people, so you know that what kind of problems they are facing and how important is the role of ULBs when the government is planning to implement something. Are they really listening to urban local bodies, what they are saying? Because when we were dealing with the pandemic, the role of ULBs was very minimum that we have seen. The PMs and DM that we have seen. So the devolution of the power to ULBs as per the 74th and amendment has happened at the ground level. That is also a point of concern. So thank you so much, sir, for your insight on local issues and telling how local governments and the governments jointly address these issues with specific interventions, including this loan, this interest waiver on loans. Thank you so much. So now we have some questions from the audience. I will go one by one, and I would request the speakers to also, because I am just merging these questions, and I'm also requesting them, because of the time constraint, I'm requesting them to answer this question and also give their concluding remarks on this this webinar. What are the takeaways for them and for the audience could be. The first question is to Mr. Raj Dibrahan, former director in the Habitat Center. There is a question from Hitesh Nigam and Radhika, that post-pandemic people have begun understanding the value of sustainable development and hygiene in cities. To what extent can the present preparation help in tackling future health crises similar to COVID-19? And that the similar question, I think sir has already addressed in his speech. There is another question that could be answered. What are some of the ways to increase the knowledge of stakeholders to make them and civic services more proficient? Over to you, sir. So you are muted.
Okay. Is it okay now?
Muted.
I think we have a, the central message in this webinar has come through and has come through very clearly, from the side of somebody who has seen all this work, Mr. Amarjyot. Clearly, so it is a fact that it is the urban local bodies that is the heart of a city. And if the heart of the city has been choked the way it has been choked, of all energies, the right kind of energies from everywhere, is a story by itself and is a reflection of the deficits and the shortcomings in our urban, development. in our urban atmosphere. And this is going to continue until unless we stop doing it. The fact of the matter is, state capital is, for a state government is meaningless. Frankly speaking, even though the entire power and resources are concentrated at the state capital, but it is in the, in the cities and their local bodies where all power should actually lie. The argument that, oh, well, they are not trained, they don't have the capacity and things like that. Over the years, they'll get the capacities, and all efforts should be made to get the capacities. There has to be an effort to make every local body, municipal corporation or a committee sustainable in terms of its resources, expertise. And of course, that is basically the only way our cities are going to thrive. If the local bodies function, cities will function. If they don't function, we will, totter along as we are doing so. The lessons, of course, are very important. I'm sure, those in the governance systems today would have realized, the inadequacies that have accumulated over the years. And therefore, some kind of redundancies will have to be built into every system, into our healthcare system. We have always been very, what shall I say, miserly. By volumes every time. Every time you have a road or an overbridge or whatever is constructed, it is out of date. It's simply, the volume swamp it. At one point of time, Delhi Gurgaon was touted as what a great, 8 laning, 7 laning and things like that. We are back to traffic jams. So you see, the Chinese, the one remarkable thing about the Chinese is the scale of their thinking has always been magnificent, and consequently of implementation. Our scale of thinking has been small, and consequently of implementation. And that is why, we are not able to meet the expectations of our population. The fact is, their people are there. We can't at this point of time, have shortcut methods of reducing populations. So that is, what I feel, that all the energies must focus on the right places and the right institutions. If we are going to have collateral, energies either scattered amongst the right institutions or only focused on collateral bodies, अच्छा ये काम नहीं करता है, एक और institution create कर दो. Okay, the urban local bodies did not work, development authority बना दो. अब development authority नहीं काम कर रही है, etc. It's special purpose vehicle बना दो. Make up your mind. Come on, So how far will you go for things not working? And substituting another blank for another blank is not going to work. So this is my thing, that yes, the lessons are dire, but nevertheless, I think and I hope we have learned them and build capacities. Even every country has to carry a spare capacity. There's a cost, fine, but it must carry the spare capacity. In a small town like Nanjing in China, the Chinese built, the local bodies built a convention hall of 5,000 each. And they're used probably once or twice a year, etc. There is a cost. But nevertheless, infrastructure is there. So likewise, if we have hospitals, even if they don't have enough patients, and thank God for that, but still the facilities will come in use at the points of time like this, if we had them. Within 3 or 4 months, of the first wave, we dismantled all our things, saying, okay, it's all over and things like that, and we're back to being hit again. So I am sure the lessons get learned, but what we do with them, that is the important thing. And I hope the resources get allocated to the right institutions. I hope I have covered the points that were
Yes,
raised
sir.
in the question.
Yes, sir. So thank you so much. Now we have question for Dr. K.K. Pandey. Dr. Pandey, are you there? Hello. I think he's not able to listen. Okay, so there is another question we'll go to Professor Lekha. There is one question from Shivi on that fiscal policies have almost never reached the third tier. So how do you think those areas at a macro level can have sustainable development without stable finances? Dr. Lekha.
Thank you, Abhishek. That's a crucial question. As I mentioned earlier, the flexibility of finances is quite crucial when it comes to the local level. But unfortunately, we don't have very dynamic taxes at the local level, and that concern is real. And this leads to unfunded mandates, because if you see the decentralized process, many functions are devolved down, but the finances are not adequate to meet these functions and assignments at the local level. And this unfunded mandates issue, that's quite crucial when we talk about making the sustainability of urban development, to make the urban development sustainable. And another point is, as I mentioned earlier, the principle of subsidiarity. In Kerala, I don't know whether you will agree with me, Abhishek, but in Kerala, the experiment was devolving finances before functions. Then there is no unfunded mandates. They reverse the sequence of the decentralization and they devolve finance before functions. It's like the decision that 40% of the Kerala state's plan outlay was devolved down to the local bodies. But that, of course, initially created some disequilibrium, and it also created some kind of an elite capture. It created some kind of a corruption. But, is this a good model that if you can devolve finance before the functions to deal with this unfunded mandates? So these are the two quick things. And third is ecological fiscal transfers. We have to give importance to ecological fiscal transfers. And in the 15th Finance Commission, and of course, it was a grand decision by the 14th Finance Commission for the first time ever in this world, that in the formula-based transfer, you are incorporating a criteria related to climate change to devolve the finance down. So that, the important decision by the Finance Commission, that needs to be sustained. Of course, 15th Finance Commission, it is sustained and it will be taken over by the future commissions as well. So my last point is institutions. Give importance, as Dr. Raj rightly pointed out, give importance to institutions, not only the finance at the Union Finance Commission, but also the state finance commissions. I don't know what is the significance we are giving to the state finance commissions to take the decisions regarding the fiscal space of the urban local bodies, because that's quite crucial. Over to you, Abhishek. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks a lot. Now I will ask
Abhishek, you're muted.
Hello. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello. Now our last speaker is Mr. Amarjot Singh Bedi. The question to him is from Aman Srivastava has asked one question on street vendors. He's asking, street vendors play an important role in running and growing the urban economy, even if they do so informally. Is the Street Vendors Act 2014 enough to give them adequate space and facilitation and enhance their role? Will inclusion of street vendors according to Delhi Draft Policy 2041 improve anything? Over to you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay. See, the Vendor Act is, personally, I feel it's very good, right? I've studied it. I kind of chose land for it. But in all practicality, it's very, very, I'm not going to say it's impractical, because if you have a lot of land spaces around you, it does get practical. You can make these vending zones, but what happens is most of the bigger cities have these land banks far away from residential areas, etc. So the whole purpose of this act was that remove the vendors from your highways and your main roads and your crossings, etc. And you take them to a place where people can go, in the evenings and pick up like little ready markets, as we call them. But most of these land, which is, given to them, is far. So eventually, though they take up those spaces, but those same different, these vendors, they come and take their place. So you're left with now to fend for the new vendors that have come in. And the minute you get into a scene where you say you don't have a license, move from here, etc., it becomes into an issue where they say ye garib maar kar rahe hain, ki rozi roti aur kahan se kamayenge. So it's a very touchy topic. We're going through it right now. So I made this place. We had given 180 licenses. I did this 100 kiosks, and in the heart of a city, we were able to. I wanted to do it much larger, but I don't have the funds to make a retaining wall in a khud that's flowing nearby. But they're doing it now. So it is adequate, but it's slightly impractical because most of these vendors don't like to go to these places where these vendor zones are made. And also I don't blame them because there's not enough footfall for them to sell the product that they get from very, congested. And also would like to add what ma'am talked about the Kerala ULB system. We have an example right there for the entire country to see. I personally feel the first step they should do is just copy the ULB Act of Kerala in every single ULB in India, and then improve on it according to your demography and your society, etc.
Thank you so much, sir. I think you have made very clear point in your earlier speech also that the role of ULBs need to be enhanced. And if we want...
It's not need to be enhanced. Look at the mayor of New York, or look at those mayors. There are senators, there are representatives, but those guys control the police because end of the day, you're doing reservation for the post of the president or a mayor.
Yes.
It's like saying that let's reserve the prime minister's post or the chief minister. Have reservations through your wards. Have your reservations. Get, whether it's gender-based, whether it's caste-based. But the top position should always go to somebody who's qualified for it. Right? You will see a change in the country. And the only problem is I don't see this happen because nobody wants to give up the powers because, once a powerful mayor is more powerful than anybody else.
True, you are absolutely right, and we have seen in European countries, including in Paris, when they are planning for the green recovery, the
Abhishek ji?
is led by the Paris mayor. So I think that we can learn from the European countries. And also we have the local models also. I think Professor K.K. Pandey is also back. So there is one question for him, Dr. Pandey. Can you hear us?
Yes, Abhishek ji.
Yeah. So there is one question. I will request you to answer this question and also give your concluding remarks. There is one question from Pooja. She's asking, Indonesia introduced waste collection banks where people were given golds and credit points in exchange for waste. The city people seem to have learned to collect waste to months instead of throwing out randomly. The waste collected is used by the government in recycling plants in large scale. Is it possible for cities in India to assign such value to waste? And there is one more question I will club, that sewage treatment in urban areas at the housing level become a possibility in reality in the near future as per the sustainability goals. I think she's also asking about the towns and villages. So over to you. Dr. Pandey.
Yeah, I could not catch the question, please.
She's asking about Indonesia model, where waste collection banks are there. People get golds and credit points in exchange for waste. Can this sort of model be implemented in India?
Implementation model is that city government is the mother institution.
Waste for gold means gold for waste model in Indonesia. You give some credit points and golds for waste. When people give waste to corporation in Indonesia, they get gold and credit points, some 0.1 gram or something.
within the city limits, they are the responsible agency. Then for the metropolitan area, there is a need to have a wider coordination.
Okay.
And for that, the Metropolitan Planning Committee was envisaged. But unfortunately, the committees have not been set up, or if set up, they are not effective or operational.
Okay, sir. Your concluding remarks for this webinar, and then we'll close this webinar then. Your concluding remarks, sir.
My concluding part is that waste is very important area to enable city to operate as enabler for economy and environment. And because if people get sick, their productivity is lost. The economy of the city require adequate services. So from that angle, waste is very important. And government policies also, as I said, 15th Finance Commission, even this year's budget, have a special focus on climate smart delivery of services, which include water sanitation and related activities. So this cannot be done by municipal body on its own. And for this, the stakeholder mobilization, awareness and involvement will go a long way. Like a ward committee created in Bengaluru, ward committee or the neighborhood level approach, or there are local councils in Mizoram. Those local councils again represent 1,500 people. These are elected body. So those type of institutions need to be replicated to really achieve the objectives.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for giving insights on this very important subject, that this series we are organizing with CityNet and other partners are AMDA South Asia and 3R Waste Foundation. So we have got very good points from all speakers, especially we have got different perspectives on how we are going to make our urban economy sustainable, how local economic development can become sustainable. So there are different aspects like on the financial front, on service delivery front by urban local bodies, and also when we are addressing these financial issues, how we are devolving powers to urban local bodies. So role of urban local bodies is of paramount importance when we are dealing with, when we are talking about localizing SDGs, when we want to achieve the sustainable development goals by 2030, the role of ULBs cannot be ignored, and we have to give them enough space to operate and make this 2030 agenda achievable. Thank you so much for joining this webinar, and this webinar will be available on YouTube for others to watch. And also we will prepare a report on this webinar and publish in Urban Update magazine's next edition. So you will be getting this magazine, so you can read it, you can visit our website and social media pages to keep yourself updated on urban issues in India. Thank you so much, and we'll be back in the next month with the new webinar on this series. Till then, keep visiting our social media pages for Urban Update. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.